Welcome back to another episode of The Pipeline. This is the first episode of the new year and the first episode of Monad Season 2. And it's perfect because Monad and Layer0 have just announced a huge partnership. So I'm really excited to have the CEOs and a co-founder from both protocols here to take us through the details. We also have @Intern joining us again to co-host. And I want to call out a particular thank you to all the guests here as we are recording this episode on Christmas morning. I'm totally kidding.
Almost could have been.
Almost could have
it's
been.
What could have been.
We were initially scheduling this recording session, and Intern over here was very ambitious and threw out Christmas Day as the optimal time to record. No wonder the calendar was entirely free.
It's just a casual, how about Monday?
Yeah, it kind of is because everyone is happy from just opening their presents and stuff.
Exactly.
I feel like I don't know, in my mind, it kind of hit the crypto ethos, right? Like stocks are closed, but crypto's 24/7. So we got to embody the principles we believe in.
100%. 100%. Well, we have certainly had Intern and Keone on here before, but I wanted to introduce a new guest for the first time. Today we have Bryan Pellegrino, co-founder and CEO of Layer0. Thank you for joining us today, Bryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be here. Thank you guys for having me. Obviously been super excited about what you're doing for a long time now. So yeah, I'm pumped.
Likewise. Would love to give the listeners a little bit of context for anyone who is perhaps new to crypto or somehow isn't aware of what Layer0 is working on. Can you give us a little bit of your personal background and why you helped start Layer0?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll speed run my own background, which is basically grew up in the States in a town of 900 people. So effectively just like a village with nothing and nothing to do and nobody around. Got a computer, just mashed on my computer for the next bunch of my life, mostly playing video games, but eventually finding programming. Went to school for CS, dropped out to play poker professionally. Did that for 8 years, did 80 countries, traveled the world for a long time, kind of playing the highest stakes you could play in poker. Online poker gets banned, and I have my first touch with Bitcoin because all the payment processes were dead and all the shady poker sites started using Bitcoin to move money around. So sort of everybody in poker found crypto pretty early. Started a company, sold it, wrote some machine learning models that I sold to some of the pro baseball teams. Started another company in the Valley with the first engineer at a A16Z, a couple guys at a Google, that company got acquired 2 years later. It was a coinless competitor, did about $1 billion overall, pivoted twice, got acquired. Did some academic research, ended up publishing with FAIR, cited by DeepMind as a college dropout. So that was fun and cool to do. And then here doing this with my two co-founders. We all went to university together. We worked in an IEEE testing and conformance lab, kind of early interop, early networking together, and then I've done a bunch of our companies together as well. So we've been working together for a long, long time. And then so that's quick background. Layer0 itself, what it does, it's really fundamentally, I think about it. It's interesting. It's been interesting to watch how differently people perceive it. The way that I think about it is just a long time ago, you had a bunch of distributed execution environments. You had Stanford, DARPA, etc. You want to run some data in a program, you just take your floppy disk and fly over. We invented this cool stack of the internet. It makes it easy. That's how we're talking now. That's how we do all of the stuff that we do today. Base primitive of that is just a simple packet, right? Sending something over the internet is basically compute array of bytes, move the bytes, and do some compute, do something with it. Layer0 is functionally trying, that was the thing. That's the lens that we view the world through, is just this base packet. You have a bunch of distributed execution environments again. None of them talk to each other. Arbitrary contract invocation of the bytes array. Run a smart contract, generate some bytes, move the bytes, do something with the bytes. With that primitive, you should be able to build anything that you can do on chain. It's really just how do you move that data around? How do you connect all of these chains so that they can talk to each other?
That's super exciting and really clear the way that you laid it out. So I know the audience is going to be excited to hear that. Would love to hear from Keone as well. Can you discuss what the impact of a collaboration with Layer0 is for Monad?
Absolutely. The Monad team is extremely excited to collaborate with the Layer0 team because we fundamentally believe that there's, with the crypto ecosystem overall, our job is to take over a lot of centralized services and slowly help the decentralized world eat the centralized world. And we can't do that without really seamless interoperability between different ecosystems that have developed over time. There's really great applications and a ton of capital and a ton of data that exists in other environments. And it's really important for those environments to be able to communicate seamlessly and trustlessly in order to deliver ultimately the best user experience and the best, honestly, the most powerful applications. And I think different blockchains are potentially better at different things. There's different programming languages, there's different sort of standards, and having a single interoperability layer that can really bridge that gap, no pun intended, is extremely important to delivering a future where we have decentralized tech taking over the world.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And I know what's something that's top of mind for a lot of users and a lot of general consumers who may not be overly familiar with crypto is what are some of the real world problems that we're solving here? So would love to hear from both Keone and Bryan. What are some of the most pressing real world problems that crypto's in a position to solve through specifically the lens of Layer0 and Monad as well?
I mean, I'm happy to start from our side. Like the way that what got me into crypto. So again, like first touch 2011, but like really heavily in from 2013 onwards. And what drew me to the space early on was this like very strong libertarian skew, right? It was like this concept of the banks sort of suck and are irresponsible with your money in general, and just with like the state of the world, and that self-sovereignty was like this powerful tool. And then you still need to live inside of a world with like rules, like you have to pay your taxes and like do whatever else. Like there's some other things, but you really should have the ability to have full control over your money, to be able to pay anybody as you want to pay, to be able to interact permissionlessly with all of this, right? Like that really resonated really deeply. And I think that was always the thesis early on about like, what, why does the space matter? The space matters for permissionless access to all of this and like self-sovereignty. I think those are like the two biggest things. So when you talk about what you're actually disrupting, early on, it was like, okay, we're going to disrupt like money, which is like a really big idea, right? Of just like literally disrupt money, disrupt like the banking and financial industry. And I think it's evolved now to being like, hey, this technology, like, then you had Ethereum, you had like programmable smart contracts, you had a bunch of things that like didn't exist with pure Bitcoin. And now it became, hey, you can actually make like much more interesting financial primitives and just structures that can be broadly useful to the world. And so when you talk about like the biggest things that you're disrupting, I think it still comes down to that, right? For like disrupting finance and money is a big enough problem to solve. But I do think in doing so, you're unlocking a huge number of other things that are really empowering.
Yeah, that's a really, really key point, and would love to get Keone's perspective on that as well. How is Monad poised to address some of those issues?
Yeah, I think that there are a number of interesting applications for crypto. I think probably the easiest one to understand is payments, because two things. In the Western world, credit cards are extremely prevalent, and credit card companies clip huge fees from every single transaction. Like, it's crazy thinking about a business where you can charge 3% of the transferred cost, which itself is a huge amount of money, and clip that coupon. And then, there's some on the back end, some of that value is paid out in terms of credit card points. but it's just a massive, massive business. That's honestly actually a big cost on businesses that small businesses and large businesses alike have to bear. So I think payments in the developed world is very clearly, ripe for disruption. Although it's also not easy, because when you think about the network, this proof of sale, the other POS network that credit cards have built, credit card companies have built, that's huge. It's really hard to accept other kinds of payment, and crypto actually solves this. Crypto is a way where anyone with their phone could pay for a service and actually, avoid this middleman. So that's extremely exciting. And then I think in the undeveloped world, or just more generally, I should say, in the part of the world where credit cards are less commonly used, it's actually crypto that's used quite a bit for payments. I think especially in the Tether space, for some reason, like Tether is really big in certain parts of the world. So yeah, I think payments are clearly a killer app for crypto, but that also means that we need to be able to transact at the scale at which current payment processing systems actually process transactions right now, which means having a network that can actually keep up with that level of load. And Monad is poised to be that network with 10,000 transactions per second of throughput. That's one thing. I think more generally, personal finance is an area where crypto can clearly provide a lot of value to many end users. So basically making DeFi like the standard for personal finance, whether that's banking or trading, borrowing, lending. There's definitely a lot of potential in the personal finance space, but we need these systems to be able to deliver a better, or at least equal, or ideally better experience compared to using centralized personal finance tools. So that means reducing slippage, improving cost of execution, making it so that the cost of trading on chain is comparable or better to the cost of trading in a centralized environment. And that means taking slippage from 1% or 2% or 5%, which we frequently see in DeFi right now, getting that to single digit basis points, which again requires a really performant environment so that market makers can quote very tightly and compete the spread down, and ultimately give a much better execution experience for users. I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'll just kind of very quickly touch on a couple of other categories. But I think identity, community, and then just more generally settlement for all kinds of transactions, whether that's settlement for stock trading or settlement for transfer of assets, like buying and selling a house or car, what have you. Those are also all areas that clearly have a lot of potential in the future.
Yeah, and even just I was looking about that as you were talking. Like if you think about like the tax of the credit cards on like the businesses, and ultimately then consumer, like the combined market caps of Visa and MasterCard, it's like a $1 trillion business, right? Like right there alone, like $1 trillion taken out of sort of largely small and medium businesses to sort of have this system that functions. Yeah, and fully agree on the settlement side.
I think at a high layer too, for like other types of transactions, right? I think about the amount of friction in the current systems, and a lot of the friction that they are solving for, they try to like max out the extractable value for it. So I think about like, you go to a crypto conference and it's in a different country. Everyone's like, oh, don't do the currency exchange at the airport because they're absolutely going to fleece you, right? Or like, I think that there are just a lot of things along those lines that exist in the current system that if you can remove a lot of the friction, if it's running on a decentralized server, right? Like if you have, all of your money is in your crypto wallet, you have access via your phone. You could easily do an FX swap, right, for 50 basis points instead of paying the ATM fee and like the 5% that each of these companies is like taking out of the middle for. So I feel like there's just a lot of unnecessary friction that when you have like one shared global state with high execution for any like transaction or swap you want to make, there's a lot of, essentially like removing a lot of the friction areas and doing it in a decentralized way, right? Where you're also protected against any one entity like failing or going corrupt, et cetera.
Couldn't agree more. I think on a high level, that's why anyone who's really building for the future and the ethos of crypto, that's why we're all here to an extent. Not that most of us could put it as eloquently as you three, but I think it's often forgotten as well that we have quite a long ways to go in terms of disrupting a lot of these traditional standards. And within this niche of crypto where we find ourselves, there's quite a lot of competition amongst different solutions to solve many of the same end problems. And I think particularly having Layer0 on here, it's clear that you, I would say, believe in a multi-chain future. So I want to ask Bryan, in 2024 or in coming years, do you see companies or protocols that are currently in a competitive stance evolving to exist in synergy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always, it's, again, early on, it was very interesting because we immediately got bucketed into solving the same problem as everybody else. And we sort of tried to be like, that's not actually the problem we're trying to solve, right? Almost everybody that exists in the space for us on the interop side is really trying to solve the trust layer, right? They're trying to solve you a validation methodology that this can be, their X validators within the validation set. This can be their validators with staking. This can be zero knowledge proofs and sort of creating this attestation. It can be a whole bunch of different things. And we've always been we're totally agnostic to that. We literally don't care. We're not trying to tell you what the sort of appropriate validation methodology is. We think that will evolve over time. And we think different applications have wildly different needs for what they actually need in terms of how they price that. And so we've always been purely focused on the transport layer. But everybody they just, in order to rationalize or sort of understand how to comp things, they've always put us in that bucket. And so we actually made it very clear with our V2 release, anybody who you see as competitive now can just live within Layer0. If you want to use them as a validation set, no problem, done. They can be a verifier, and you can even wrap them externally through hooks. It's very, very easy to do for us. We think everybody will ultimately live within that layer in terms of what you see as competitors right now. Again, we don't view it as hyper competitive, and I think we kind of think more and more. We've seen a couple already, but we think more and more many will go into that underlying layer for a bunch of different reasons. But yeah.
Yeah, Bryan, and I think I want to ask as well, because it seems like you guys took on a massive problem that exists in crypto and have emerged as one of the market leaders in the space, new outlets or new areas that you think are important, and creating new standards overall. And one that I'm really excited about are OFTs in general. Would love one, I guess at a high level, if anyone listening doesn't know what an OFT is, to kind of break down what an OFT is, what the purpose for them are, why they're important, and what the future might look like with more OFT adoption.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to a little bit of a backstory of how we actually started building Layer0, because we didn't set out to build a business at all. This was me and two of my closest friends tinkering, right? And so BNB chain or BSC at the time comes out, and you're every day kind of getting spammed with oh, more volume than Ethereum, more users than Ethereum. And I'm all right, I've been here for a long time, and most of this other stuff was just kind of vaporware, but okay, if somebody's actually using it, could be interesting. So we started to ask ourselves, what could you actually do with an environment that's fast and cheap, but you just treat as entirely ephemeral, right? And so bring back state that you want to have permanence back to Ethereum, but do stuff in this cheap sort of higher throughput execution environment. And so what we built at the time was just a game for ourselves. It was a stupid game, but it was just you have packs of gladiators, they fight each other to the death. If they die forever. And if you win 10 battles, you are freed from the arena and mint an NFT permanently to Ethereum. Again, never released, totally for us, just to be what could you build across this thing? And in building that, we realized hey, there is no way to actually coordinate the contracts on each chain to actually do this thing. You just need a central coordinator that triggers events on both chains. We're well, that sucks. And so then we were like, okay, but like bridges exist. So surely somebody solved this problem and looked into bridges. And really, we're just like really horrified with the state of bridges. Like we would never trust any significant amount of money to any of that. And then we looked deeper into like how bridges were functioning at the time, and everything was done through these wrapped assets. And wrapped assets kind of fundamentally changed the relationship that the end user had, because it went from the end user, like if an end user uses Uniswap and they execute a swap, right? They bear like risk that the contracts are broken for the duration of their swap, and then they go on about their day. They never think about it again. But like when you're using wrapped assets, the user now is holding an IOU that basically bears risk in perpetuity. Like as long as it is issued and in existence, like any day at any point in time, the user's asset can just be like worth nothing, right? And it's just like very fundamentally different risk profile for the users. It shifted from the LPs bearing the risk to the end user bearing the risk. And we thought that was like a really bad trade-off for the end user, especially with like the state of bridges getting hacked. And so we actually, before building Layer0, started focusing just on the bridging side. And it was really this concept of, we thought most volume was going to be driven by the application level, that the end user wouldn't need to like know what a bridge is, and applications would just abstract it away. They would just make this seamless environment. And so the applications needed this like seamless liquidity layer. But to do that, they needed it to really be native assets on the other side, because they needed to like do another leg of some action, do something with it. And they needed it to have this concept of like instant guaranteed finality. So if I trigger, hey, I'm going to swap or bridge something from like chain A to chain B, I can't get there and be like, oh, there's no liquidity, somebody front run you. And then like, how do you revert that transaction? Does the user now need gas on the destination chain to revert this whole messy situation? And so we started building like a precursor to Stargate around solving that, purely native asset bridging with instant guaranteed finality. In doing so, realized like there still was no transport layer and you still couldn't trigger events on any chain. And so then we're like, okay, like we have to build that. And that became Layer0. But fundamentally, the thesis was still the same, as like wrapped assets inherently suck for the end user and all of the properties with them. And that native asset transfer is just significantly better. So now you move that to a broader structure of OFT, this concept of like Omni chain fungible token, which is really just saying if you're an issuer and you have assets natively on a bunch of chains, right now, it's really a nightmare historically to move these assets around. You want to move Tether around from chain A to chain B, like you might have 5 billion on chain A and like 500 million on chain B, and something really exciting happens there. And there needs to be like, you want a lot of issuance or the strong sort of directional flow to that chain. There's a lot of demand. Right now, you're paying external bridging providers like 6, 8, 10, 12 bips to do this transfer. Oftentimes, you're getting wrapped assets instead of native assets. It's just like hard. Inventory is hard. So OFT is this concept of like everything basically being handled through the contract itself. You have no need for any sort of external bridging providers at all. Everything is done directly in the contract. The asset issuer can own all security over that contract side. And now you're talking about like, you have a stable coin, right? Say this is Tether, say this is whoever. Now you can move, $100 million worth of Tether for literally the cost of gas, right? So like I can move $100 million of Tether for like 1/10 of a penny or something, right? And so if you can do that, if like the friction of moving assets or of inventory management approaches zero, then now capital efficiency wise, like now you can arb spreads across chains at like sub-cent spreads. Now you can do like all of these things that market makers can do and that the broader market can do to make these markets more efficient, to have it not to be 5% sort of gaps for slippage, as you're able to move just to more efficient structures or have pricing mechanisms be sort of more fair broadly. So I think there's a lot that you can do with it. Hopefully I explained it in like a reasonable manner, but yeah.
I think so completely. And I think it's a perfect segue into hearing from Keone as well. Like, what is the significance and the impact of this for Monad? Obviously, this is a critical part of the launch component that really needs to be done well. And obviously the level of detail and thought and execution behind what Layer0 is building is exciting. But I want to hear from you as well. How critical is that?
Absolutely. Well, at the start of Monad's mainnet, Monad will be a tiny baby, like an infant that has a lot of potential, but also is very new. And all of the data lives on other chains. All of the assets live on other chains. All the users are on other chains. So from day one, it's incredibly important to have a robust, trustless mechanism for those users to move some of their data, or move some of their assets over to Monad, this new environment, where they can use new kinds of applications that don't exist elsewhere. So I think at the end of the day, it is really about making the user have to worry less about the logistics of exploring a new environment and taking advantage of new opportunities that are in that new environment. But I guess all of that is kind of obvious. Like that would probably be true for any new blockchain. So, I guess the thing that really jumps out is like with Monad being fully bytecode EVM compatible, with many changes under the hood that actually enable new kinds of applications. For example, the parallel execution in Monad, the parallel access database underneath that layer of parallel execution. These are things that ultimately enable super, super, super high throughput, which then can enable apps that they can't be anywhere else. So I could definitely envision a world where maybe the users are playing a game, they're trading on an order book that's fully on chain, they're playing with a social app where there's tons of interactivity and tons of actions that are happening on chain. They're doing all of that in Monad in this new environment, but then actually like the data that is being leveraged actually originally lives on another blockchain, and maybe like the actual authority of that data is actually fully on that other blockchain. So I think it's just kind of opening up a new dimension in terms of what's possible overall in the blockchain without causing users to have to restart from scratch, and enables a lot of split functionality, perhaps between execution and data, or between old data and new things that are happening, without the users having to worry about it. So yeah, definitely very excited about the partnership and the effort moving forward. I think there's a lot to come.
100%. Definitely really exciting. And you started to touch on the parallel EVM there, which is really becoming a hot topic across Twitter, and crypto in general. A lot of people are talking about the parallel EVM now, and it seems like a year ago or even 6 months ago, this wasn't in the conversation at all. Would love to give the listeners an opportunity if you would walk us through the original thought process behind Monad, why parallelize the EVM, and what other bottlenecks you run into along that process, and how you're solving for those as well.
Absolutely. I think so. Maybe just to go backward a little bit, prior to Monad, I was working together with James, our CTO, on building this high performance trading system. And the principle there was really constantly using perf and call grind and other tools to analyze the bottlenecks in our code and identify opportunities to reduce the latency, reduce the complexity, so that we could be as fast as possible. And the result of many, many iterations of that was a trading system that was hundreds of nanoseconds from tick to trade, from packet coming in to sending an order out. And that's kind of our team's DNA overall, is just this approach of trying to measure like where are the bottlenecks and then respond appropriately. So when we started with Monad, the original vision was to build a more performant version of Ethereum execution, and also to build a more performant version of Ethereum consensus, ultimately to build a much better engine for decentralized smart contracts. And when we profiled the existing code, when we profiled existing clients, it was very clear that the single biggest bottleneck was state access. And that's actually consistent with what I think those in the know would have said anyway, because the state database that all Ethereum clients are built on is really inefficient. So in particular, Go Ethereum or Geth uses level DB, and which is a commodity key value store for storing Merkle tree data. Just to back up a little bit, again, Ethereum stores all of its state in a Merkle tree so that it can generate a Merkle root, which is a commitment to all of that state, which is very helpful then in the context of bridging or composability with other components outside the blockchain, because it is a commitment to all of that state, all of that global state. If anything in the global state changes at all, then the Merkle root changes. So, it's like it's similar to like those time locks that people do sometimes, where they make a prediction but they don't want to reveal the prediction, so they go hash it and then they post the hash on Twitter, and then when the thing happens, then they show a screenshot of what they did, the original message, to prove that they were right originally. It's very good for when you're trying to be kind of annoying and nerdy and like show that you're right, but also not reveal the actual thing at the time. It's also, of course, led to like panic every now and then when a really famous person makes a incorrect or a prediction that might or might not be true, and then the prediction gets revealed. But that's kind of a thing for another day. But in any event, like the Merkle root is really important to Ethereum. It's a commitment to all the state. In Ethereum, all the state is stored this way, but then that's a data structure, but then the actual data is stored in this other commodity database called LevelDB. And the storage is extremely inefficient because the exact path through all the paths through the tree are stored directly in this other data structure. There's many, many lookups required in order just to retrieve one piece of state. That's kind of version 1. Version 2, which is the Aragon client, is a little bit more performant, or definitely more performant, but still using this commodity database. Anyway, this is like kind of a long-winded rant, but what I'm telling you is that when we initially looked at the performance of many different Ethereum clients and also other blockchains clients, what we could see is that the single biggest bottleneck was state access. So in Monad, we ended up embarking on this long, almost a year-long journey of building a new custom database that has a couple of specific properties, and I'll mention them to you really quickly. The first property is that it's natively storing the Merkle tree data in a custom data structure that's specifically optimized for that kind of data. So you can imagine that would just be better. But in particular, the second thing is that this database supports asynchronous reads and writes, which means that when you have a whole bunch of virtual machines running in parallel, they're all executing transactions. They're all like playing through bytecode and running into cases where they need to go read the database, like an sload or an sstore. If the database were not this, or if the database were like the old database, then each of those queries would block all the other ones. So, there'd basically only be a single pipe in and out of this database. So even if you have 100 virtual machines running in parallel, there's basically one pipe into the database. And so parallelizing doesn't really improve things that much. So with this custom database, the great thing is that we're actually enabling parallel access to different regions of the Merkle tree so that many virtual machines running in parallel can all progress much more efficiently. And then the parallelization becomes a lot more performant. But I guess to sum it all up, everything is basically just rooted in benchmarking, looking at bottlenecks, identifying the hotspots, and then going and engineering a solution to respond to what we see as the bottlenecks. It's really done in pursuit of performance rather than just to be able to create a headline like parallel EVM. And so I think it's funny that the market is now caught up to this narrative. It's great. Like, it's awesome that people are excited about performance and making the EVM more performant. But we've been sort of laying the trap for the bear for the past year and a half, and I'm excited to spring the trap on everyone next year.
Yeah, I will say maybe that it's getting popular and mainstream now, but I think to a lot of people it was really exciting. So I first spoke to Keone like almost a year and a half ago now, and I remember leaving that call like just really like at the idea itself. It was the first time somebody really convinced me like this is both solvable and like a good person to solve it, right? And so I went back to my co-founder, my CTO, who also, you know, like his master's research was in packet fairness and data centers at like the sub nanosecond level. So like same thing, like hyper optimization. I just went through, was like talking through this idea and like how Keone was approaching it and your guys' background. And he was like, no, like if this idea, like if they can execute on their vision of how this functions, it's as big as it could possibly be from like a broad idea. And I went, and I never do this, but I went to our mutual friend now, and I said, you know, I've spoken to like a lot of people in the last couple of while, like this is a team who you need to go talk to. And I know he went and invested, and I think he's a very big supporter. But no, I think from anybody who heard the idea and was technical and just like spent time talking to the team, it was very clear that this is like a very big thing to solve and also seems solvable. Which are just, then you need to see somebody who like is dedicated enough to actually grind and do the reps and like get to the end solution. So I think a lot of sort of more technical people have been excited about it for a while, and I think it's awesome that we're like, you know, it's almost home stretch now to kind of see it come true. So it's awesome.
Yeah, I think over the last like really 2 months specifically, it's definitely become like a major narrative or thing in crypto that people are excited about, this parallel EVM. But I mean, there's been a lot of pushes that are like either mainly or like the vast majority of it is around marketing, or it's been under work for like 4 weeks or something. But I remember Keone, I can't remember if it was on like a very early call or if it was more recently. But when Keone and James left Jump Crypto to pursue the idea, it was like the obvious thing to do from like I want to launch a project in crypto and have it be somewhat relevant was to launch an L2. And it was just like, from first principles, made much more sense at the layer 1 level. So one, super happy, Keone, that you decided to take this approach. I'm excited to see it come to fruition. But I would love to just like, I don't know, thinking about everyone who's now excited about parallel EVM, like just stamp that, you know, 20 months ago when you, James, and the core team decided to go at it full force, like you are the godfather of the parallel EVM. Like the first guy who seriously went at it full on, you know, months, like over a year before anyone else was like even excited to start working at it. So
Space
been awesome
has a very strong tendency to do that. I remember sitting in a room as we were about to launch, and we were trying to describe the difference between like, all right, you have like individual chains, and then you have this like one-to-one relationship that most have, which is like cross-chain, and like what do you actually call a mesh? Like we came up with this term omni-chain, and there's like 0 instances of it ever like in the world. And so we announced we sort of use this term. And like 3 months later, I was viewing people who were launching like, oh, we're going to do that too. And like on their website and in their paper, they mentioned like the word omni-chain like 26 times on their homepage. I'm like, I remember just sitting around like inventing that word. Like that's not even, you know, yeah, people will always fast follow. And I think it's an inherently like pretty noisy space because a lot of the work being done still now today is like very technical. And most people don't understand how to grok what's real and what's not, and the actual differences between implementations and what is, you know, yeah, well, what can actually be done. I think it's just like a nature of the space right now, but I think, you know, performance over time will tell the tale for sure.
Yeah, it's been crazy that like, I don't know, you just think that now it's the hot thing, but it's like 2 years of just hardcore building, going at this problem. And then people now are excited about it. It's in the public eye. And just the head start on the engineering side is great to see. I'm excited to see what that looks like in the next few months. But Bryan, I had a question for you, and we can absolutely, Danny will edit this out. We can chop it out if it's something we don't want to hit on. But obviously, Layer0 had a massive announcement last week or a little bit over 10 days ago that, you know, the community's been talking, and that there will be a token expected in the first half of next year. No worries at all if we don't want to talk about it, but like something I'm curious about, right, is what kind of goes into the decision to go through to take this path. If there's anything else to share around that front, but Obviously, it was a massive thing. Everyone was excited. So I would be a bad podcast host if I didn't at least ask, and we can edit out later if not.
Yeah, no. I mean, like originally when we were actually like we have fully written economic white papers from when we were launching, right? The code in it like has mention of the token. Like these are not like none of this stuff is like hidden or disguised or anything. But we launched, and you remember when we launched, like we just like built this thing. We didn't tell anybody about it. We just built 100% in stealth. We launched like zero expectations. And so we launched Layer0. 2 days later, we launched Stargate because we're like, all right, people are going to need this to be able to like do anything for applications. Like they'll need this liquidity layer. And then fast forward like 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks after launching, like this isn't like us forking MasterChef. This is like thousands of lines of brand new code, not pulled from anywhere, written from scratch. And like 2 weeks later, there was like $4.4 billion in Stargate. And like we just spent like we went from okay, like we'll think about that other stuff. Thinking about nothing but security for like the next 6 months. Like that was the only thing that we thought about. And so everything just got pushed out into doing that. And then now we're at this stage where like, okay, now the protocol was like being used, like really used for billions of dollars and all these applications building. And everything just kind of got like pushed to the side. And for us in the way, like, again, we didn't say anything pre-launch. We just built and built and built, and then we just like launched overnight. And that's the way we just like to do things. We don't like artificial external deadlines. We don't like anybody sort of telling us what they think we should. Like, we're just going to build the thing that we think has the highest maximum utility and just like release it to the world and like let the devs use it. And like, that's been our approach. And then there just became this sort of like frenzy over time, of people like speculating on whether or not there'll be a token. We're always just like, yeah, we're not going to say anything. And like, if anybody tells you they know something, they're like lying. Like nobody knows. There's like don't listen to anybody. And still people like had this sort of crazy frenzy around it. And so it got to where like every single post that I made or like people just, anybody was actually interested in the development side and the technical side, like couldn't filter through the noise of this like noise around it, the people sort of questioning whether or not there'll be a token and all of this. And so what we wanted and like our goal was just like give clarity, like this thing is going to happen. We're still going to focus on like doing it right, and we'll go through and do the same thing that we always do, and we will release it, and that will be that. But it was sort of the goal was, again, just give more clarity. There's not any reason why all of these people need to speculate or have like questions. Like we will be extremely clear about what it looks like and what everything is. And like, so again, none of this like from the very beginning in the code has always been, but then I don't know, people got into this crazy state. So it really was meant to just give clarity. And then, over the next 2 quarters, we'll really add to that.
Awesome. Yeah, it seems like you would be putting out a post around technicals or talking about something, and whatever the discussion topic was, there was just like a chant of like children in the background, like token.
Yep.
Like I could imagine it was extremely distracting from your side.
Especially we had V2, we had all of this other stuff. Like we have many months of like technical releases that we're rolling out. Like V2, we never mentioned to anybody before we like rolled it out. Same sort of thing. And we're just like, we want people to focus, especially V2 is like very significant architecture change, very significant, just like want to reiterate like the philosophy of like why we built each component. In the beginning, we were just like, here's a bunch of stuff and like it exists. And everybody sort of everybody just focused on topology, where for us, we're like, we don't care about the current topological implementation. We don't care like what it looks like. The protocol is the protocol. It's immutable. Like the world can do whatever it wants with it. Like that will evolve over time. And people really honed in on like the current topology, not what the protocol was. And so what we wanted to do is go through and like really just explain to people like, these are not just arbitrary decisions about why we built things. Like it really mattered, and it mattered because we had like this set of things we believe a protocol needs to have, at least on the interop side, to like be successful and not have this be like a massive train wreck for consumers and like the end state, right? Of just like another broken system of financial rails. And so we wanted to like spend more time explaining that. And we didn't want that to be sort of drowned out in that chant of token. So yeah.
Welcome to crypto. It almost is what it is to an extent. I think I'm sure Keone has fielded that question more times than Monad's TPS. But wanted to kind of zoom out on this a little bit here, and hear from both Bryan and Keone. We can start with Bryan because we're rolling here. But what do you think people should be looking forward to in the next 1 to 5 years, and what does the future of bridging and cross-chain communication really look like?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of I give this answer a bunch, but like the end state for us is literally that just like nobody thinks about us ever, right? Like when a developer builds an application on the internet today, just like people they don't think about like the internet, they don't think about TCP/IP, they're not thinking about like how the Ethernet protocol works. Like the goal should be just you're like invisible over time, right? And it's always been like we think we will get abstracted away at the application layer, and that's totally fine. I also am I'm a very strong believer that like we should be super agnostic as to like what is being built on top of us. The other joke I give is like Vitalik definitely did not think the primary use case of Ethereum for a long time was going to be like dog coins, right? Like that you build the thing that like enables people to do stuff on top of it. You don't necessarily like judge the applications of what they're doing. And so, we're excited. We're excited about a bunch of stuff. We're excited. It's always been our belief that there would be like, in the beginning, you had like, here was Ethereum, and everybody just sort of like took shades like this, like a little bit this way, a little bit that way. And we think all of that gets washed out like as ETH scales. But when you have like really strong orthogonal trade-offs, and like Monad is one, Solana was one, like all these things do things that are just like fundamentally different or structurally different, things that Ethereum can't do. And we think those are like incredibly compelling approaches, and there will always be structures to have like draws towards that. And that could be a world where, everything shifts in that direction, but it could also be a world where, again, you have like a bunch of storage on Arweave and a bunch of computation on another network and a bunch of, all of these things can like evolve over time in terms of how applications use each of these environments. We're probably 10 years ahead in TradFi versus where I thought we were. Like would be like rewind 4 years ago and ask me if you think like S&P 500 companies are holding crypto on their balance sheets, like the largest banks in the world and central banks are like doing POCs of like settlement and DVP stuff on chain. We're just like, I did not see that coming in the time frame that it has at all. I think that's very interesting. But for us, we try, again, we try not to care too much. We try to just really build the thing that we believe has the highest possible utility. And if you build that thing, like then applications will always surprise you.
That's huge. But in my experience in crypto, that's key. And when you find a team or a developer or a leader who is kind of building with that mindset, that is something that kind of lights off some bells and whistles for me that, this is worth looking into. This is someone who's really committed to actually solving some of these problems that we're faced with and pushing crypto forward as a whole. Would love to hear from Keone as well. What are you excited about, and what should the community be excited about on the horizon?
I think that we've, as crypto users, sort of developed a lot of bad habits. For example, we're just very used to, doing a transaction and then seeing like, oh, this thing would cost $20 worth of gas. Like, oh, I guess that's okay. I'll just do that. And that's really crazy because, $20 is a lot of money. Like we're in very privileged positions to be able to like pay that fee and not really think about it. Or maybe we should be thinking about it and we're just being irrational. So I think that there's a lot of expectations that can and should be reset. Those are related to transaction fees themselves, also cost of transacting on chain, which includes cost of slippage. Like it's still very normal to set your slippage parameter to 1%, like very, very normal, or maybe even more, like 5%. You're trying to buy some meme coin and you have to crank it up to like 10 or 20%. So there's just this expectation of what's normal that is probably not how it should be. And for new users that are coming into crypto for the first time that aren't OGs, that don't have a giant stack of ETH, like that is actually a very significant cost, and it really deters them from adopting decentralized tech. I think that one thing that's going on right now that's quite interesting is people are trying out Solana for the first time, and they're like, oh wow, this means I can make a trade and I pay like $0.001 or even less, like to make this trade, or like to do this action. The fact that the actions are basically free means you could do a lot more things and not have to worry about like your action budget per day, which is just a crazy thing. I think there's some interesting effects in ETH right now, like people will like not list their NFTs too low because the gas cost of doing the listing is so high that it's just not worth it. So there's effectively a floor, which is just the gas price, but it's a fake floor. The NFT is actually worth zero. Then there's a lot of other things like that. Like people will, I don't know, like just they'll deposit into Aave. It costs $50 to do that, and then they're trying to withdraw, and then they look at it and they're like, I'm not going to do this right now because I just don't want to waste that much money. So that's a habit on the user side. And then on the developer side, there's also a lot of habits where developers are trying to optimize for gas very finely. And there's a good reason for that right now. But then it means that they might, be omitting additional defensive assertions that would actually protect their protocol because they're trying to minimize the amount of steps, the amount of compute overall, so they can reduce the amount of gas. And then that ultimately has downstream effects of hacks and security issues. So I think the thing that I'm excited about in 1 to 5 years is just a renormalization of what we think of as normal right now from a cost perspective. I think that'll enable a lot of additional users. And then, of course, beyond that, I'm also very excited about just a new wave of applications and users that can take advantage of this. But I think it really comes initially from changing what is normal.
Couldn't agree more. And I think this is a perfect place to wrap up here. I'll let you all have the final thoughts, but really, really excited to have had Keone, the godfather of the parallel EVM, Bryan, the godfather of Omni chain. I think the community is going to be really excited to dive into this one, and also certainly to learn more about this partnership and how Layer0 and Monad are working together. So thank you very much, both of you, and Kevin, of course, as well, for your time and sharing your wisdom here today.
Thanks you for having me, and always a pleasure to get to sit down and chat with Keone for a little bit. So yeah, thanks again.
Awesome. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.